The following transmission is between myself and KingGath, seasoned Fallout 4 modder and the lead developer behind the SimSettlements 1 and SimSettlements 2 mod projects, including Rise of the Commonwealth, as well as Conquerors. SimSettlements has been praised as one of the most unique, expansive, and well-crafted mods that Fallout 4 has ever seen, overhauling the settlement building system in Fallout 4, allowing entire homes to be constructed with just the click of a button, and soon entire towns, outposts, and even militaries in the subsequent chapters. With almost 6 years worth of development across the entire series, SimSettlements 2 Chapter 3 would wrap earlier this month, concluding with an all-out war against the Gunner faction. During our conversation, we go over KingGath's humble beginnings, the design philosophy of SimSettlements 2, and of course, what plans Gath and the rest of the team may have for Starfield. This is the Atomcast, and the best way you can show your support is by subscribing to our Patreon, as your monthly contributions will go towards improving the quality of transmissions, as well as helping to decrease the time between uploads. As always, links to our Patreon, as well as guest socials, will be linked in the description below. Without any further ado, the mind behind the SimSettlements series, KingGath. So, KingGath. You just
Is it time for me to chime in?
I pause a lot.
There was a long dramatic pause. I
do long dramatic pauses a lot. So like don't worry. Okay. But yeah, you just put out SimSettlements 2 Chapter 3 from a lot of the stuff I've been hearing. That is the official ending of SimSettlements 2. How you feeling? How's the team feeling?
It felt great about the launch. It felt really good to get that milestone. Now, I will clarify, it is the end of our big chapter releases. So we still have lots more patching to do. We got a lot of content that got cut. We've got some other little bits of content that we started and didn't finish, and some last little bits that we want to sneak in there to kind of make the whole experience feel complete. But the kind of Jake's story, which is really what it is now out there for people to experience fully, which feels pretty damn good, because it was a long road. I mean, we started in 2018 and we're just now finishing, so it's a big long project.
And that's only for Chapter 2. That's not counting Chapter 1 and all the stuff you did before SimSettlements.
So Chapter 1 started in development before SS2 even came out. Well, obviously, but it's been in development since way back then. So for a history lesson on it is SimSettlements 1 came out in 2017, I believe. And I started, and then a few months after that, I started mass recruiting. I was just all right, well, we got this mod is crazy popular. This is my chance, take it or leave it, to build kind of the vision, get to where I hope this would get to. And so I recruited a crazy amount of people, and we were working on it back when SS1 came out, and it originally was just going to be a story expansion to take SimSettlements 1 and add a story tutorial and a lot of characters you could recruit, so that way you had a purpose to your settlements of, all right, as I invest my time in settlements, that will attract new characters, will have quests for me. And that was kind of the pitch that I had for a lot of people that I brought on board. And then over time, they were chewing away at it and kept writing and kept recording audio. And in the meantime, I'm programming away, and I eventually got to a point where I realized most of my code I did for SimSettlements 1 is kind of straight garbage, because I was learning, and I kind of need to reboot all the code. And as soon as you do that, you're talking about telling people new saves. So then that naturally led us to, okay, well, if we boot this as a sequel to the mod, we don't have to flub anybody's saves. They can keep going and finishing those saves with SimSettlements 1, and we'll just encourage people to start new characters with this new mod, which has a very different focus, and we can work in some of the new mechanics. So it is, all of SS2, all 3 chapters, whatever whatever chapter you're referring to, like it all started back in like late 2017, early 2018.
Let's go back even farther than that though. Like when I say where did this all begin, I mean so specifically like when you I guess the first question that should be properly asked is what was your first Fallout experience like? And by that nature, what is the first thing that you experienced in the game that made you interested in modding specifically?
Okay, so Fallout the franchise or Fallout 4?
The franchise in general. Like first
Franchise
question.
in general.
Yeah, what drew you into the series?
I'm trying to remember when. So I definitely played it when it came out, Fallout 1. And I think so I'm gonna butcher some timelines of like when games came out because it's a long time ago.
Oh, don't worry. None of the fans will get mad about that.
So I was into like all of the the perfect time to talk about this, like Baldur's Gate and stuff, like all those overhead RPGs, that the isometric RPGs back then, that was like a big rave of them, and Fallout came in among those. I can't remember if Fallout came out. I think it came out after Baldur's Gate. I'm not actually positive on that. But
that
anyway,
sounds like one of those things that's correct, but you just can't prove it without looking it up.
Yeah, I got to go look it up. But I think one of the things that's fun about these conversations where we're not looking at our phones and stuff is it feels old school, right? Like most of the time I'm hanging around with my buddies, we would just pull out our phones and look it up. And like, no, put your phone away. Like, let's just have a conversation, and we'll let the bad information fuel the conversation. It can be fun.
The mysticism of conversation has returned.
So somewhere in that era, and I remember Fallout just like blowing my mind because it was like. Well, first of all, there's like guns, and there's talk of prostitutes, and there's just massive cursing and heads exploding, and that was so different than all those other RPGs, right? Like, most of them back then were like fantasy genre. I don't think I'd ever played a post-apocalyptic anything. I don't think at that point in my life I'd seen Mad Max or anything, because it probably came out when I was like 11 or 12 or something. So like I hadn't seen anything like that. So that was my first experience into the entire genre of post-apocalypse. It was just such a big change of pace from all the fantasy RPGs I'd been playing. So like that really sucked me in. But I do remember with Fallout 1, I hated it by the time I finished it, because if you haven't played Fallout 1, it has a time limit where you get to a point where you can make the game incompletable. So there's like you have like a car and you have gasoline, and you can travel around, and then there's a point in the story where there's like a nuke to go off or something, and you have to make it to a certain location before that happens. And I was so busy trying to explore the whole map that I got to a point where if I just like clicked to travel back to where I needed to go to finish the last quest, that I would run out of time on the way there and I would lose. So I had got it to a point where I thought I was doing what I always do in RPGs, which is completionist them and explore the entire map before I finish the main story.
Yeah, obviously.
In that game, you can't. Or you probably could if you did things in different orders. But for me, back at that age, I couldn't. And I didn't learn that, you got to keep tons and tons of save files. So like I hadn't learned that lesson yet in life. So I always hated Fallout 1. And then Fallout 2 came out, and it just like blew my mind with how good it was. Like I still, I know it's definitely not the case that it's my favorite Fallout, but I have some of the best memories from Fallout 2. Like going back to play Fallout 2 is really hard now. I can't do those isometric RPGs anymore. They're too slow, but man, I got some great memories from that game.
I did ask you a secondary follow-up question, which was at what point in your experiences with Fallout got you interested in modding? I'm gonna have to cheat a little bit here and insert a quick secret 1.2 question here. What is your current favorite Fallout game? And I will warn you, if you say anything except Fallout New Vegas, a lot of people are going to be very mad.
Oh, sorry. They can hate all they want.
Hate the game, hate the player, not the game.
So modding. So I've been modding games since I was a teenager. The first game I seriously modded was Quake 3. I got involved in a lot of big teams, and like I did a mix of programming and 3D art back then. I want a different username that I will take to my grave, because I was a teenager and did cringy teenage things then.
Well, now you're just motivating somebody to find that
to go
information.
Try and find it. Good luck. Good luck. The name is so far removed from anything I use now.
Very good.
But I really got into modding then, and then I would go on and off from modding different games. So I modded like StarCraft and Warcraft and Half-Life. Just modded all sorts of games, and I've tinkered with the creation kit and the GAC, but I never did anything that was releasable or for those games. So Fallout 4 was my first time releasing anything for a Bethesda style RPG, and that was just timing. So whenever I play games that have a lot of mods, so and like Bethesda games especially, I usually take notes while I'm playing of like, oh, I want, like, this mechanic bothers me, or I like this, but I think it could be deeper, or whatever the case may be. And I'll just take notes while I'm playing. So that way, when mods come out, I know what to go search for. I'll be like, oh yeah, I really wanted, I remember this from early in my experience, like I really want a backpack mod, or I want this, or I want that. And then I'd know to go search for those real quick for my second playthrough without having to spend much time thinking about it or digging deep into into Nexus, because you go to Nexus and there's just, especially if you wait a little while, like after a year of one of those games come out, there's 10,000 mods to choose from.
Wild.
So it can be very daunting. So I like to have like a little guide. And then I had on my list, one of the problems I wanted to solve was carry weight. It was like, I like looting like crazy. I want to loot everything, and Fallout 4 made that more valuable than any other Bethesda game, because the scrap, the fact that you build everything in your workshops, you build all your weapons with it. So like, there was incentive to literally collect everything that wasn't nailed down in the game. And a lot of people I saw were just using cheats for it, right? You just cheat your inventory weight, or just load up with crazy amounts of backpacks and mod your armor with extra carry weight. And I was like, well, that seems boring. Like, if I'm just going to pack mule it all, like I might as well just cheat the stuff in. And then that's when I had the idea for salvage beacons of like, well, why don't I hire some people to come get it for me? And so I busted out the tools and tinkered away and made salvage beacons. And the only reason that I am even modding today is because at the time when Fallout 4's creation kit came out, my wife got pregnant with our first son and started going to bed 4 hours earlier than I was used to. And so like we used to do everything together. And then it was all of a sudden, it was like, oh, we're just not going out anymore. We're not hanging out and watching our TV or going out to restaurants. We were just all of a sudden all that stopped because it was no more drinking. And, I guess you get tired when you're pregnant. So
surprise.
Yeah. So suddenly I had 4 hours or more every night to fill in. And I go through periods where I just don't game at all for long periods of time. And like, this was actually one of those periods. So I had played Fallout 4 when it came out. And then I can't actually remember when Salvage Beacons came out. I want to say it was 2016.
Funnily enough, I actually pulled that up because if I remember correctly, Salvage Beacons was the first mod that I experienced from you. And I remember seeing that. I'm like, oh my God, that's an amazing idea. You first uploaded it on the 26th of September, 2016. So roughly a year after the after the game came out.
After the game came out, yeah. So that would have been, So when I came back and that was the first mod I made, I'm trying to remember. So then Sim Settlements probably was probably like 6 months after that, maybe probably March 2017 was when Sim Settlements came out. But
yep, there it is, March 10th, 2017. History was made.
So Salvage Beacons was me trying to solve a problem that I didn't see anybody else solving, which was like, how do we immersively give ourselves infinite carry capacity with some slight disadvantages, because you actually had to wait for your stuff to arrive before you could access to it. That was what got me pulled into modding, and then the fact that I had all this free time suddenly was what kept me going at it. I mean, it also helped that people liked it, right? Like, that's encouraging. People like something you put out there, you're going to be inspired to put out more. So I always tell people, like, go endorse the mods you like, because you'll inspire folks to keep making more stuff.
I think saying that people liked it is doing yourself a little bit of a disservice. I mean, maybe you do.
Well, Sim Settlements, Sim Settlements blew up when it came out, but Salvage Beacons was just like a moderately successful mod.
You were talking,
I don't think it's ever cracked like top 200 of Nexus mods or anything. Like it's just but it was enough success that I was like, oh, people like the stuff I made. And a couple of reviewers like Gopher to this day will say it's his favorite Fallout 4 mod, period.
It is a good mod.
Hearing stuff like that is like, oh, cool. Like people like what I'm working on. Let's see what else people like. Let's see if I got good ideas or not.
Right.
Yeah.
I want
to answer your 1.2 question. It's obviously Fallout 4.
Oh yeah, obviously.
Hours I have into this. I love New Vegas. I live don't get me wrong. I love New Vegas. Where's the beef is like my favorite Fallout quest of all time. Like that is. So there's some amazing stuff in New Vegas. But like New Vegas for me, every single time I get to Yes Man, I am done with the game. I don't want to play anymore. I don't know why. I don't like when the stories drop me in a point that's so open-ended like that. I don't know why. I just like tune out all of a sudden. Like, I don't want to do like, I kind of want them. I want a more linear story experience. Like, I can appreciate having all those options, but I don't want to I don't like when I get dropped into a spot and it's like, here's 5 giant quest lines, go do them. I don't know why. That just like shuts me down. It's too much freedom.
Yeah, you're overburdened by choice. The burden of choice basically means that there is no choice.
Well, it also gets to a point where without the linearity, then all of a sudden the different things can't interact with each other as much. So then all of a sudden, like, you go do one quest line and the other one doesn't acknowledge it because they had to be designed for you to be able to do them simultaneously.
Yeah.
So I much prefer, the nice thing about the linearity is then you'll always hear the next beat in the story is referencing the previous. So it feels like it matters more. And you can do both. Like some games will do a good job of that, but it's a lot harder. And given that New Vegas only had, what did they do that in like 12 or 15 months? There's some insane development cycle.
Yeah, like just over a year, I think.
Right. Like that's crazy to me. Like that alone is a massive accomplishment. The fact that they were able to do that quick in somebody else's engine, right? It'd be one thing if like Bethesda's team put out a New Vegas level game in a year, but they like Obsidian did it. Like that's nuts. So
yeah, they had to learn it and then they had to make it.
Yeah, like
that's
absolutely talented
wild.
team. Absolutely. But yeah, I like, because of that, it feels like a lot of that's disconnected. Whereas, a lot of people give a lot of flack to Fallout 4, the lack of choice. But I like linearity. I like that kind of the faction choice you have. Like all of them acknowledge what you do in the other's quest line. Like they care. So I dig that. I dig the way they did that. And now seeing the other side of like how complicated it is. And like, I'm not a writer, but I get involved with the writing as far as like, I hear out the pitches for what we're going to do and talk about, give out ideas about how we can change things to encompass all of our mechanics and whatnot. And like the amount of work that goes into giving players choice is crazy. How many more, like you give them one little simple choice, and to react to it, you spin off a bunch of different new branches that you've got to pay off now.
Yeah. Because that was well, because that's one of the things that I've been noticing in my playthrough. As of the time of this recording, I'm pretty sure that I have just one more like 4 or 5 hour stream to go before I've actually finished up Sim Settlements 2 Chapter 3.
What quest are you on?
We just
you just finish?
I forget what the name is. We're on the 3rd quest that you do for Magnuson, where he tells you the big secret in the tells you the big secret in the Museum of History.
I think that's the 4th Magnuson one actually. So yeah, you're closing in.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're actually like one of the rounds of bug fixes we're working on right now is making sure that all the different paths pay off correctly. Because like from where you're at, there are so many different branches that could have been spun off. In particular, there's a quest called Led by Example, which has like 8 different outcomes or something. And each one of them has to be acknowledged by the quests that follow it. And so like we keep finding like little bits like, oh crap, that doesn't react to this correctly, or that doesn't react to that correctly. And that's and that stuff to me is what I call a showstopper. It's like the showstoppers, really what we talk about with those are things that prevent people from progressing through the game. But if you progress through the game and you get the wrong outcome, that to me is just as bad, if not worse.
Yeah. One of the things that it was like one or two people brought up during some of the earlier streams that I did was they were asking like, hey, you know, I killed excuse me, I killed Berman in chapter 2, and you're at this point where Berman's audio is still playing, or well, you start the mission and then you start that one mission and Berman's there, and in my playthrough I I let him live, but I think in other people's playthrough he, even if they killed him
back from the dead.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, he isn't synth.
No, yeah, that's what he tells people, the headcanon. We actually I found another engine bug today. So we found 2 engine bugs with this story after releasing it and looking at people's saves. Mm-hmm. One is there's a Papyrus is the scripting language we use to make all this stuff work.
Right.
And there's a function in there called get dead, and it basically is supposed to tell you if an NPC was killed, so that you can check if the player killed them. Mm-hmm. It turns out that after 30 days in game, that the answer to that question resets whether or not the NPC is actually dead or not. So when we were relying on that, if people passed 30 days, which is very easy to do when you're playing a game like, or playing a mod like some settlements, where sometimes you're just sleeping to like let your settlements advance, right? So it's real easy to hit 30 days past. The NPC will reset, even if they're a unique essential NPC that you would expect to be immune to that. That is not the case. So there's one bug we found, and that is why pretty much everybody who played Chapter 3, other than I think like 2 patches ago, we fixed that. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, anybody who started before that is going to find Berman back to life, which is such a bummer.
Yeah.
But we were also able then to go back through some of our other quests and see like, oh, we were relying on that function here too. We got to get rid of it. Like there's have you played through the CPD quest line from Chapter 2?
I did. I didn't play it through in this playthrough, but I did play through it in when I was streaming Chapter 2. And I will say I really enjoyed the CPD quest. I feel like that was very well written, very well paced, and a very well done story. Hats off to you guys.
Shout out to Andy Cowdy who wrote that one. So the CPD has a moment in there where if you're not quick and if you're a bad shooter like I am, mm-hmm. You can end up with one of the police captains dead. And there's a path through our quest line where if Simon gets killed and later in your quest, he can just come back to life magically, because we were relying on that function and we didn't know. And so no one's reported it. So hopefully no one happens to have like I think most people, when they lose a major character, they naturally save scum it, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to let yourself commit to like, oh God, I screwed up and now that person's dead. It's pretty rare the person will let that fly.
That's why they don't let dog meat be killable.
Right, because everybody would just be save scumming every 2 seconds. Yeah,
exactly. Which makes sense. Absolutely. Like, it's not realistic, but it makes sense. Like, nobody wants the dog to die, or nobody wants your friend to die, or your allies, so they're just going to save scum it.
Right, you're saving people irritation, right? Because then you're going to be like, oh, if this AI, if it was just better and the dog was a better fighter or whatever.
He didn't get in my way.
Right. I didn't mean to nuke him.
Stop walking in front of me.
Yeah. So we found out that bug, and then today we found another one, which is there's this function we use to like temporarily, it's called disabling, and it basically like makes an NPC invisible. Mm-hmm. So that way if we need them to like, oh, this person went away, like there's a point in the story where it says like Teresa went to the shore. Well, the player's never going to go to the shore to try and find her, so let's not risk having her lost off on the shore relying on the goofy AI in this game, so we just disable her instead. So then it's you headcanon, okay, she's off doing that.
Yeah.
There's a way that a shortcut to disable and enable people, and sometimes the function just fails. We had no idea that was possible. So we have to use another method for that now, and like we use that function throughout our quests and code everywhere. So it just explains like finding these like bugs in core functionality of the game at this late, and it's happened literally every chapter. Sometime after release, people are creating these bug reports that are just like, what, how? And then eventually we recreate it, and it's like, oh, the only way that's possible is if this function that's documented on the Creation Kit website doesn't work as advertised. And
Weird.
That turns out to be the case. Yeah, it's a little frustrating. I'm actually super hopeful and hyped for the next gen update, because Bethesda's promised some bug fixes, and I've been feeding them reproduction steps for some pretty serious bugs in the game engine, and
Yeah.
I've been getting positive reactions to it, like, oh, can you show us how to do it in a vanilla game? Can you send us a save? So like I'm confident that somebody who knows what they're doing there has access to this stuff. Whether or not they figure out how to fix it is anyone's bet. But
yeah, because I had somebody, it was either privately over Discord or in like during one of my streams tell me that they like I forget the name of the mod, but it's like a nav mesh mod that you like very strongly recommended.
Yeah, everybody needs this interior nav cut fix. You gotta have it. It is oh my god, does it make everything play better, especially at HQ. Like HQ is night and day. I thought we were just screwing up. So because HQ is basically a series of 4 interior settlements that are connected. So and we found a hack that, so most people up to this point thought you could only have a settlement either had to be 1 interior cell or 1 exterior cell. And I don't remember how I figured. I think I was basing it off of the way that there's a mod called Conquest. Have you ever used this?
I have. I actually played Sim Settlements Conquest.
That's Conqueror. That's Conquest.
Oh, Conquest. Yes, I know what Conquest is.
Yeah, it lets you build settlements anywhere, right?
Yep.
So you would basically just drop workbench on the ground. And I realized that, like, okay, so there's clearly some engine code where we can move workbenches. And so we figured out just by just took a stab at it. And it turns out if you go to a new cell and pull the workbench from the other cell and bring it with the player, then the game counts that cell as part of that settlement too. So we can basically, every time you move between floors in HQ, we just move the workbench to a underground place below you, and that counts.
Interesting.
So we're in a giant interior cell all the time. So then when we figured out that the nav cuts, which are, when you build, say you build a wall or build a plot in the middle of a settlement, it cuts a hole in the nav mesh so that the NPCs know to walk around it. And every time you do that in an interior, those holes
get bigger and bigger.
Memory. They stay in memory when you go to another interior cell. So every time, so you'd go into an elevator, you'd be in HQ, all those holes would get cut. Then you'd go down another floor, those holes stay there. So now the NPCs can't path anything that has the same coordinates in both cells, which was a ton of stuff because we didn't know that, or we would have put the 4 cells in, the 4 corners of the universe.
Yeah.
If we'd have known that the nav mesh holes would carry with you. And then when we found out that it carries over to vanilla cells, like you just go to a dungeon and now all of a sudden all those nav cuts from your settlement, it's no wonder people run into random bugs, because if you've got something huge, what's the vault from the DLC? Is it 88?
Yes, I believe so.
So imagine you build a giant Vault 88 settlement, and then every time you go there and then go to a dungeon, all of the things you built in that vault now are cutting the nav mesh in that dungeon. Oof, what a brutal bug.
It just gets shredded.
Right, and this near interior nav cut thing fixes it.
Yeah, so if you're playing Sim Settlements 2, I've been waffling. If you're
playing Fallout 4, you should be using that. Period.
In general, you got to have that
interior nav cut fix.
But it was it was interesting because either I can't remember if it was in the DMs or in during a live stream, but somebody told me hey, you should probably have this because Gath found out about that and he told somebody Bethesda. And they're looking into that, which is very cool. Earlier, though, you mentioned, because this was also brought up, funnily enough, today during one of your streams. I think Sai actually brought it up. Okay. So you mentioned that you did modding for StarCraft, Warcraft, and Half-Life before you started doing modding for Fallout or Fallout 4 specifically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think... I know that he mentioned 2 of them. I can't remember if he said Half-Life or he said the Last of Us. But what he said is that the voice actor for Shandy from the CPD quest is actually a voice actor who voices characters in StarCraft, in Warcraft, and in Half-Life.
Yeah, if you look at her IMDb page is insane. She has been in almost every franchise that we know. I cannot tell you how to say her name. It's Lia Minnelli or something like that. It looks like it always makes me think of Liza Minnelli, and it's well, it's not that. Hold on, let me bring up her info.
I'll probably I'll probably be overlaying her info on in the edits here. So I got you covered there. Don't worry.
You got me covered. Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So, but I don't want to talk out my butt about who it is.
Fair enough.
But yeah, she's got the most famous one she has, like it's in a lot of it. It's Lanny Manella. That's what it is. So, or Laney is probably how you say it. So the most famous one she does for Bethesda players is she voices the Dark Elves for I believe it's Oblivion.
Oh, that's cool.
Oblivion or Morrowind. So like she's good, but like just looking at some of her stuff, she does Diablo 4, Dead Space, Sons of the Forest, World of Warcraft, God of War Ragnarok. Like she's just like she's just one of those like universal voice actors that just does little characters across all of them.
That's very cool.
Yeah, very cool that she was willing to come down and do a mod. And her range is nuts. So she does both Shandy, the kid, and the judge, who's a ghoul. So,
nice.
Like the widest range you can possibly imagine.
In
this, and does them both.
From a small child to a rough voiced, fully grown adult woman, more than fully grown, 200 years old.
Right, exactly. So like, that's some range right there.
Exactly. One of the unique things about this interview specifically, and we talked about this briefly before the interview actually started, is this will have been the first interview where I actually like put out feelers to the people in my community, like, hey, what, like, do you have, I'm going to be interviewing KingGath. Are there any questions you guys can ask me, or that you would like me to ask him? And more so specifically, well, obviously, I'm going to try to answer as many directly or indirectly during our interview here. But you mentioned earlier that you aren't really as big of a character in the story writing process. Your skill set and expertise is more on the coding and the technical side, the actual modding stuff. In that essence, especially because you are, obviously in a sense, you are the brains behind this entire operation. And because you said that, you did salvage beacons, and then from there you expanded and did sim settlements, and then eventually you did sim settlements 2. Obviously, sim settlements 1 doesn't really have a story or anything. Or at least not to the same level that Sim Settlements 2 does. In that sense, though, when you guys, or maybe when you originally started getting this project, Sim Settlements 2, up and off the ground, what sort of to what degree did you specifically contribute to the overall construction of sim settlements? And where did the ideas and the concepts come from? How much were you involved with that and like leading the story avenue, and like how much was delegated to other writers and the like?
I mean, I have almost nothing to do with the story. Like, as far as like my contribution is, it tends to be, here's my like overall objective. This is what I'm hoping to accomplish. However you guys want to do it. So the way SS2 started was, I had this idea of, let's do 100 recruitable characters that will appear at your settlements based on what you do. And the characters can become settlers, they can become wandering traders, they can die, like whatever, but the characters should be drawn to your settlement for some reason. So some of them were like, we would have, after you built up to a certain level of industrial or a certain level of agricultural, that would attract that settler. And so we brought on a whole bunch of writers, and it was like, all right, everybody, your first assignment, I think we started with 12 or 15 writers. Like, we just recruited like crazy. Everybody who had a sample that was not utter trash, we were just like, yep, come on, let's go. And then it was, we gave them the assignment of, all right, pitch us 10 characters. And we just want to have like a give us the rough synopsis of like, or your 2 paragraphs about the character. And then like give us the what that's going to happen with them. Are they going to have a multi-stage quest? Are they going to have just an introduction and then just become a settler that just walk up and they'll just have some interesting background dialogue? Give us the pitch for each of them. And then everybody did that. And then the next phase was we started approving them one at a time for full treatment. And then the writer would go forward and continue. And over time, like some of the writers dropped off. So some of them would turn in their characters and then never proceed. But at the end, after all that, we ended up with about 50 characters we were able to pull out of that. So we made it halfway, which felt pretty good. And during all that, we also, I tasked there was a guy on our squad for a while who went by Danger was his username, and he disappeared one day, just went off the map. So Danger, if you're out there, would love to hear from you again. And Danger took on writing management, and because like it was nearly impossible for me to manage everything on my own. I mean, literally, like we went from just me by myself with a couple of people I was chatting with to help me with random things. Like there was this guy named VG who made the demolitions for the plot, so like when the little explosion, and eventually someone goes by Del Chupanabre started giving sounds to the mod. So like and then like a few people who were helping me test, and like that was it, to having over 100 people working on Sim Settlements. And that happened like over in like a 3-week period. It went from that.
Oh, geez.
And so I needed people to help manage all this. So Danger was managing the writers, and I had given Danger the task of like, okay, we want to do this character thing, but I also want to have a story that will teach Sim Settlements. So I used the example, and I still to this day, as one of my favorite quest lines that has a tutorial in it, and then you barely know that there's a tutorial, and that's Warcraft 3. I love that story to this day. I think it's a really cool story, and you're learning about all the units, and you're learning about all the other factions, and there's while you're playing, to where when you come out of the campaign, I mean, now this isn't the case, but when it first came out, you get out of the campaign, you have all the knowledge you need to play multiplayer. Like I loved that. Now that in all those types of games, whether it's StarCraft 2 or whatever, they balance them differently. So you have one balance in single and one in multiplayer. But back then, that wasn't the case. And so I liked the idea of having like a really compelling story that would teach you the mechanics as you went. So it would be like, the quest objectives would kind of would get you to use or the missions would be like have important story beats, but also get you to test out the different things. And so I wanted that. So that was the mission I gave him, and he picked 2 writers to work on that. And then a lot of the meetings would generally be, them pitching what their idea was for where the story would go. And then I would just throw out like, okay, could we change this? Because that'll feel better with this mechanic I'm working on, or that mechanic I'm working on, or whatever. And then I've mostly focused on code. And then it was just kind of steering things in that direction. And then as we went, eventually the writers that we put on the main quest duty, both of them ended up falling off, and Sarik ended up taking over. So the first writer left, then Sarik came in. He was a voice actor working with us on some characters, and then said like, hey, I've got some writing chops if you need any help. And he ended up getting pulled into that and was helping out on the main quest. And then the second guy that was originally on it left, and then Sarik was holding the bag on his own.
Yeah.
And he took the skeleton of what we had and just ran with it. And he has been literally writing that story for 5 years to get it all right. And we went through several like massive direction shifts for various reasons. Sometimes it was because people left. So, after he was by himself, we brought on another writer to be his assistant, because it's a lot. Like writing that main quest, there's a lot there. It's a lot to keep track of. There's a lot of characters to write dialogue for, a lot of little subquests. And we brought somebody on, and they were taking it in one direction, and then that guy left later. And then so Sarik, and we decided like, okay, well, some of the work that guy did that we weren't super into, let's cut that. Let's bring it back in. And so we just kept rewriting as much as was necessary to try and get this into a place we were happy. And during all this, so that stuff was supposed to be an expansion, and it was taking so much longer than I expected. I mean, I'm an idiot for not expecting as much. You bring on 120 people, you think it's going to go quick,
right? That's not a weekend. That's not a weekend event you can knock out in 2 days,
right? But I get so like I am really, really fast at programming, so I can like knock out a pretty significant system in like a couple of weeks. And so like I'm like chugging out these systems, and I'm ready to go. I'm like, well, I got to get this next thing out there. And so because it was going to take, it was clear that like, oh, there's like another year of work still on this.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I don't want to go a whole year without releasing anything. So then, and I was basically done with the systems that I wanted to launch with. So then I was like, all right, let's come up with something cool to release, to tide people over. And so I started messing around with taking our city plans and making it so that they could build up in the game. And at the same time, I was tinkering with the Nuka World mechanics. And when we combine the two, it's so much fun. Like so the Nuka World system, I think most people hate it, not because, it's fun to play with the raiders and stuff. But I think most people hate the idea of like, wait, I just built up this settlement. You want me to go beat up my own people?
Right.
Like maybe Marcy, but everybody else, like, I don't want to punch Sturgis.
No, he's cool.
Right. And so like that system always bugged me. And I think a lot of people, and that's why that even though that DLC is like really well done and it's got some of the best decorations in the game. And it's like, it's a really cool DLC.
The objectively best trailer in the entire franchise. Like that shit slapped.
And then they have this mechanic that just kind of feels bad. Yeah. And I don't think it's a bad mechanic. It's just that in the way they introduce it. And so we thought, okay, well, what if you could have that mechanic from the beginning of the game? Like if that was just, you come out of the vault and all of a sudden you can just choose, I want to be a raider instead, then that makes a lot more sense, right? Because then you didn't spend all this time building it up. Instead, you're stealing them from people. So so then Conqueror was born, and we needed our own, what's his, I always forget his name.
Jammer.
Shank.
Oh.
We needed our own Shank. And so I took one of our writers who was working on the in-game newspaper, and I asked him to create us a Shank. I was like, I just need some raider that can show up right at the beginning of the game and give the character, a reason and explanation for why they're doing this. Because, if you come out, like we always, with all of our stuff, whether it be Conqueror or now SS2, one of the requirements that I give the writers is it's got to feel natural from the start of the game. Like we're not going to rewrite the intro of the game. We're not going to depend on people running alternate starts. Like we are modding Fallout 4, so we have to embrace what it is, and we can't change that. Like, right? Like we're not here to rewrite the game. Like even now to this day, so this is where I think my fingerprint comes on people's writing, is I kind of like set the parameters of like, this is what you're allowed to do and what you're isn't. One of the things I hate is modifying the base game. I want it to feel like everything that's happening, and there's a couple exceptions we've made, but everything that's happening is because the player chose to do something or chose to engage in something, and that is creating these ripple effects, which is spawning these new story moments. So it's not that we modified the base game world, not that we're changing the story that's available, it's that we're offering something new, but it happens because of what the player does.
Right.
So we don't go in and like edit vanilla locations or change dialogue trees for characters. And like the one exception of things, like we try not to ever plant anything in the base game world. There's obviously a couple exceptions, like the Ron was a big plant we had to do. Even Jake himself doesn't show up he's not in the game by default. You'll see his workshop, but if you were to never build a recruitment beacon, or if we were to give a plugin that disabled him, you would never know we were there. And so the same thing happened with all the little sub factions. Like originally in the writing, it was that they would just be there, like the Nightingales would just be there all along. And I fought against that because I like the idea of this being a reaction to what the player's doing. So those are the points where my impact comes in story. And then the second big point was, and why I told all that backstory on Conqueror, is Conqueror not only gave me, it made me realize how good the combat mechanics are when you involve them in settlements, because it's a lot more dynamic, and you can have these big epic battles in random locations. So that, but also gave me a taste for getting involved in story content. So in order to pull off the rapid development we did on Conqueror, I had to be there at all the writing meetings and just kind of help through, like give out ideas of like, all right, well, what if we do this for the story? What if we do that for the story? And, just being a sounding board. So I got pretty involved after that because I liked it. It was just fun. And I steered our story for what became SS2 toward, all right, we need to end with the combat mechanics because it's so much fun. I don't want this just to be a raider thing. There's got, like, let's take the story in a direction where it makes sense for the player who was frozen in Vault 111 to wake up from cryo and eventually be leading an army. Like, how do we get a story that earns that? Because it feels so good. It fits in naturally with the war theme of Fallout 4. So those are the points where I've had like an impact on the story.
What's like the 'cause obviously, you know, with a story like this big, and especially one that's has to interact, as you said, with the game world in such a specific way, it can't like replace the entire story. It has to walk alongside the main story. That's why you have key moments like when you take the GNN Plaza near the end of chapter 2. You have the opportunity at least to get you know, members of the Minutemen and the Railroad and the Institute and like all the other main core factions on your side to attack the Gunner Plaza. And it seems like you're doing the same thing with near the end of chapter 3, which I haven't gotten yet. We'll be doing that tomorrow though.
Nice.
But
make sure you do it before Once When It Rains completes.
Speed run.
You get to a, which is what you're on now, like right at, like as soon as you start the next quest, it cuts you off from all that. So do that first. Just
definitely, I will make sure to do that. But yeah, so it has to walk alongside the storyline. That way, it doesn't feel alien or out of character or anything. But in that vein, how do I say it? In that vein, well, you know, just in the story writing process, because obviously a story this big has to change and has to take different forms, and it's different from like the way it started to the way it ended, because you said that one of the ways it actually started was the whole 100 unique settlers that show up at your settlements, which is still a function in the game, but there's just so much more. In that sense, though, when you actually had like a finished, you know, like this is like, you know, the first draft of Sim Settlements 2, like the entire thing start to finish. What is like the biggest things that's changed from the first draft to the final draft, like the biggest factor that changed in that time period?
Definitely the shift toward us having this combat focus at the end, because like before that we were basically leading up to the story was heading in a direction where the ending was kind of the ending of the vanilla game. So we were not necessarily going to give you an alternate ending to the story. It was going to be more like there's a little bit after the story. So it was going to be kind of like, okay, after you defeat the Institute, or after you defeat or you side the Institute, because that's basically the two endings, right? And then it's just a different flavor of who defeats the Institute. That then there would be like a payoff in our story. Like there was going to be this extra bit at the end of that. But once we decided to go in this other direction of like, okay, let's have our own antagonist. Let's not, because one of the problems with using the base game faction as antagonists is that there's no clear, like obviously everyone now thinks like, oh, the Institute was evil, because there's a few things that happen in the story where you're like, well, there's no really like gray area there. Like that's just bad, like that they're just like sending out synth replacements and they're having them murder their originals. Like I've said this a few times on podcasts and streams, is like if you would have made it to the Institute and you found that they had like a separate apartment set up for all the people they replaced, it turns it into this total gray thing where it's like, okay, well now they're taking people and they're actually putting them in a better situation so that they can have spies out there. Now it's gray. Now I don't know who the best person to side with is. But regardless, what's that?
I was just musing on that. Like, yeah, that would have really muddled the whole philosophy of it.
It would have made it less evil, right? It's outright like you're just murdering people so you can have spies out there. Like that's not cool. So it made it hard to justify that the Institute were potentially a good faction you could side with. But regardless of that, we still have the problem of, at the end of the day, the player gets to choose. So we can't treat any of them as our antagonist, right? Because as soon as we take sides with one of the vanilla factions, any player who doesn't like that faction now doesn't like our quest line, right? So we have to be able to go along with whatever the player opts for. So we needed a set of characters that were like, yep, you're right, player. Whatever you chose is perfect. So we needed a new antagonist. And we didn't have that for the longest time in development. And it was only when, after coming out of Conqueror's development and realizing like, oh, the story is so much more enjoyable when there's a antagonist along the way. And in Conqueror, the antagonist was actually Aiden. So like Aiden came out of Conqueror too. So not only did it change the direction of our story, but we actually pulled a character right out of the story, and we're like, well, there's no reason like in this alternate timeline, because the idea with the whole jammer thing in Conqueror was you're just choosing not to do the main quest anymore. In fact, we solidified that by immediately giving you an optional objective to murder Preston and company, and we had a special perk that would allow you to bypass the essential flag on any NPC and kill them. Mm-hmm. So it was like our way to say like, okay, if you go down this path, you're choosing to be a evil character, and this is going to be a whole other story for you. And so like that whole shift of like, oh man, it's so much more fun to write a story and so much more enjoyable to follow these characters when there's somebody pushing back at what you're trying to do. And like that was the biggest change to our story. And that's when the Gunners naturally fell in. And funny, before we even had gotten to the point of deciding we needed an antagonist, there was that scene with Berman and Wise. I'm 99% certain had been in there long before we decided on the Gunners. I might be wrong on the timing of that, so Rick would have to correct me, but I feel like that scene was already there. So we kind of knew, we knew Gunners were kind of going to be somebody in our story. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what the path was exactly. But I know that was the biggest shift we made, and where it basically forced us to rewrite all but about 3 quests. So we had this giant quest line all written, a lot of assets created, and we just pivoted and redid a whole bunch of stuff. Now we repurposed a lot of stuff. So there's a few things that got lost. Like I'll tell you guys one thing that never made it in. In Flickering Lights, yes, you go you go through all that dark stuff. So originally that was going to be an alien ghoul.
We mentioned, I can't remember if we mentioned it during our chat now or before, but I've had a couple of your devs come in and, enjoy the streams, talk with me, help me out every once in a while. On the first one, when we were going through Flickering Lights, they actually did mention that. They mentioned that instead of a ghoul, you guys were originally thinking about utilizing a Zayton alien to be the creature down there in the hangar room.
More than just a Zeton, it was going to be like, okay, what would happen if a Zeton had visited Earth a long time ago and got infected by the radiation and became kind of ghoulish? And Ooh. we actually have the skin and the model, and it all works, and it like
of actually, a Zayton ghoul.
Yeah, like we have that working, and then we decided that so partway through development we broke into chapters. That also was a big shift too. Realizing the scope of what we were trying to do, and then realizing like the amount of years this is going to take.
Yeah,
like we're gonna like we already had felt how many people we were losing every year. Like mm-hmm. You get a lot of people excited on, and then some number will exit because either that life changes for them, maybe they're not gelling with the project. There's also a big problem, and I've learned this over years of working on mods across other games, is the ambition part is easy, the idea phase is easy, but the execution phase, not everybody's cut out for it.
Yeah.
You also have the problem of everybody works in a silo most of the time, and so it starts to feel like, is this even real? What am I even doing? And so like people will kind of have little existential crises over this, and so fighting that, one of the ways that I've determined to fight it, I don't know if this is the best way or if I'm sure other people have figured out other ways, because we do occasionally see a big giant mod like New California or something release. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, those giant projects never come to fruition. And so I don't know what their secrets are, but our secret was to do regular releases, because then you kind of have like a sprint, like an agile development thing going on, where periodically everybody's rallied around the same smaller goal, and that feels way better. Like you feel like a team then, and you don't feel like everybody working on their own.
Right.
So that was a big change for us too, is shifting over to that chapter development. But that also changed a lot of our story, how we had to focus on the story. So something like the kidnapping of Jake, spoiler alerts, like that ended up, we were going to actually end chapter 1 further down than that, but it was like, no, that's an awesome ending of like all these people, we make them fall in love with this character, and then we take him away from them for a year. Like that, then it makes it feel all the more epic when you get to do the rescue.
I remember when I ended Sim Settlements 2 Part 1, and it's just like Jake's gone, and I finished off the recording, because for chapter 1 I did actual like playthroughs of it instead of stream playthroughs, but I finished off that. and I turned off all the recording software, and I just kind of sat there. I'm like, bruh, where's Jake? What the? Come on. It was a very good emotional impact as like the big cliffhanger.
Yeah, it was a way better cliffhanger than we had for chapter 2. For chapter 2, we didn't have as good a one. But the chapter 2, instead of a cliffhanger, it was like, okay, well, we know like HQ is a great spot to end chapter 2 at, because then you kind of say, okay, now for the next year while we're developing, the player can get a save where they fully developed HQ out. So now they felt like they spent a year preparing for this war. You know what I mean? It's not, that's one of the fun things about the chapters is that there's this mental part of it where it almost feels like in-game time for your character passed because it's been so long since you've experienced it in real life. I don't know. It was we kind of tried to play that to our advantage of where we chose to end those. So then it'll feel like, okay, this war is coming and it's literally going to take a year. Actually ended up being more like 18 or 19 months for us to get chapter 3 out there.
Yeah.
So that's going to feel kind of cool. And that was its own thing. But that also made it so then whatever we kick off chapter 3 with, that sets the tone. And so starting with something crazy like an alien ghoul, like that automatically people are going to be like, oh, are the gunners working for aliens? You know what I mean? It would have been like, it already is a weird shift in tone. And we always had that quest planned to be like, we wanted something a little different. Like it would be fun if there was like kind of a horror themed and you're going through this dark space just to break things up. So like a lot of times when we're planning these quests, it's just to keep things fresh. We don't want it to get bored. You get bored from samey stuff, right? If every quest was build different plots, you'd get tired of building plots. Just like I think I've already had some people say like there's too much assaulting territories in chapter 3. Fair, that's fair. And that's something we'll work on improving later, like for post-launch patches of like, all right, we'll add in new assault types where you can do different things, so that way you can keep it fresh and exciting for yourself. So we were trying to introduce different types of quests to keep it interesting and that type of quest, but the alien ghoul was just too much of a this is what a bizarre way to enter, to like start things off and then not pay off, right? There would have had to be some sort of payoff for the alien, like maybe you have Cassandra do research on it and like you find some miraculous discovery and that helps you resolve the story. Like there had to be some sort of payoff there. So by making it a boring ghoul, it just, then the star of the show is that location and the memories of like, oh, that was kind of cool to go through and do like the to see all these characters' reactions. We also used it to start an arc for Aiden where he starts doubting himself, which opened the door for us to bring in Salvador, so that we have somebody who's specialized in military. Which with Aiden's an interesting character and like that. So we don't really delve into his backstory too much here, but if you've played all of our story, dug into all of his dialogue, and also played Conqueror, you know that he was a Minuteman, and he just kind of felt he feels a little bit of guilt from the fact that the Minutemen fell apart and that he didn't do more. In the Conqueror story, he's inspired and he rallies the Minutemen to it, but in our story he never gets to that point, so he doesn't, and if he had if he had the capability to do that, to raise an army and build up an army, he would have done it with the Minutemen, right? So it made sense to us that we needed somebody else to be the military head, not Aiden, even though he's got a he's very combat focused, obviously, and always worried about danger. But we took him down an arc of self-doubt, which we hope to pay off one day. Like we actually want to do some
a spin-off with
content.
him.
Not necessarily a spin-off, but like a companion quest for all those characters. So like sense. Imagine, with Jake, like the main story is obviously resolving Jake's stuff, right? We have we've given you his little story arc and that pays off in chapter 3, but all the rest of the characters are just support. And so we thought it'd be cool to give, because a lot of people really, really bonded with all the characters that we gave you guys as your department heads. And so
they're really great characters.
The writers knocked it out of the park, and those voice actors, man, they're so talented.
That is one thing I gushed about for a little bit. Like bugs and stuff aside, that like a lot of the stuff that I've experienced in Sim Settlements 2 has been like really good. And like there's a couple of things where it's like, that was pretty solid, but like overall, like everything in the mod is fantastic. But the one thing that has been consistently outrageously well done is the voice acting. I'm not gonna give any spoilers or anything, but when she comes back to, I guess that's not really a spoiler, when when that
And it
scene
is a
in the.
spoiler. I don't think most people know that. If they haven't played through it, they might not even know that that's going to happen.
Well,
So
don't
spoilers.
they?
Yeah,
Well,
spoiler
okay. Well,
alerts.
yeah.
If you haven't
Spoiler
played
alert.
chapter 3 yet,
Warning: if this is a
close your
spoiler.
ears.
Yeah. But that scene in HQ with the two of them, where they're having that back and forth, I actually was stunned for a second, because that scene specifically is probably like one of the best scenes, if not the best scene that I've ever seen out of a Fallout mod. It's incredibly well voiced, it's incredibly well timed, paced, written. It honestly blew me away. And
I agree. The first time I watched that, and I was doing it in alpha, and I was just like, I feel like I just walked in on my parents arguing. Like, oh my god, that was intense.
Mommy and daddy are fighting.
Right? Yeah, it was a really well done scene. Give them props. Like that was the first, and I might have been the only scene that Cobus actually coordinated a joint VA session and had them record. They were in their independent studios, but everybody connected to Zoom, and they were like riffing off of each other because we wanted that scene to hit hard. So, because that's a pretty big moment. One of the things that Jake did, and I don't know if this was intentional by design or like Sir Rick would be a good guest to have on if you want to hear more about this. I'm just telling you little bits I can remember from conversations with him. But one of the things that I kept sticking on with him when we would discuss the story was that Jake's story is kind of like a better version of the player's story, in a sense of that, like, there's no emotional payoff for the Sean arc, right? Like it's kind of it's a meme, because you never got to bond with this character, and your spouse, you get to know them for 20 minutes. Right, that. Exactly. and then they're dead. There's no emotional attachment. And so instead you have this character who has kind of the same thing going on if they lost their spouse and child, and you get to see it play out in a way that's I think more, it's different than your story, but it's a story involving a spouse and child where you get to see it play out for real. Like, and you get to hear the emotion in the character's voice of how much it mattered to them. And you get to hear their side, and then all of a sudden they come in and tell their side of the tale. And it's almost like catharsis for the fact that we didn't get to live out the spouse and child life in Fallout 4 with our character.
Besides the ghoulified Zayton alien, which I'm going to be very disappointed if there's not a standalone Halloween mod or a standalone update that brings him back into the game.
Maybe we'll bring those in as an invader. We'll do a invasion of the ghoul aliens. And come flying in and attack your settlements.
do a Fallout 76. But besides that, the obvious front runner. Besides that, who would you say is like your favorite character? And I'm in a sense, I don't mean like the character that you think is, the most well written or gets the most screen time or is the most emotionally rewarding or fleshed out or anything, but which character specifically in Sim Settlements 2 would you like, if they were all lined up, which one would you pick out from that lineup and say like, I like this one the best?
Besides the obvious of Jake that everybody likes.
Yeah, besides Jake.
I like if I exclude the main 7 now, if we exclude our department heads, and we go to, and we'll exclude the Ron too, because he's an obvious one.
I guess he would be the obvious first choice besides memeing the ghoulified alien.
if we go with like the side characters, like the recruitables, I think my favorite is Scribe Monty Phylon. He is a Brotherhood brewer who speaks in like Old English. And he was voiced by Cobus, who does all of our voice direction. And he, to this day, refuses to do more lines for that character because I think he thinks the character is so absurd, but I think it's so fun. Not only like the just the absurdity of somebody speaking in Old English, the brewer, the not so subtle reference to Monty Python in the name. I love that character, and I think it's a lot of fun. And I have really fond memories of doing all the lead up for that character. So that character was actually forecasted in Sim Settlements 1. So in Sim Settlements 1, we had a expansion called Industrial Revolution, and I built that while recruiting everybody for what became SS2. And I always had this idea of all these buildings I wanted to do, and one of them was a brewery. And I thought it would be really fun to have recipes spread throughout the Commonwealth that you could find, and they would teach you how to make custom beers in our system, in our brew system. And about partway through, I don't remember if it was during the initial release or if it was like we patched it in later, but at some point when going over all the different characters people had pitched, I noticed that one was a brewer, and I pitched to that writer like, hey, what do you think about, we don't know when this is going to be finished, but like we could kind of forecast that he's coming. Let's take all these recipes and we'll put notes in them from your character as if he's the one who wrote all these recipes, and he can have commentary on them. So it'll be like you kind of get to know his character in advance. So in SS2, those recipes, you can't find them anywhere. So it's only like it's in this content is in SS1, and if you remember it, there's a payoff in it. I think that you can find the notes as you unlock. Oh, I know what it is. So now Monty hands you those recipes. It used to be they were scattered across the world. Now he just hands them to you. Anyway, that I have a lot of fond memories working on that, because that was the first time where somebody got to take some of the stuff that was not going to be ready for players to see for years and got to put it in early. And I remember how excited the writer was to be able to do that, to be able to see some of their stuff kind of come to life early. And like that kind of energy was infectious. And like, that really was one of those moments where I was like, oh yeah, we got to keep doing stuff like this, of like, getting stuff out to the player base quickly, and like, keep doing those big patches to get stuff out there and get more people involved in the player side of things, like letting, like take this thing you've been designing and let's get it out to the players. Because it's motivating. It's, when you watch somebody play through it and they're all excited about it, like I worked on that. There's something really cool about that. Right. So trying to get more people to feel that. And so Scribe Monty Phylon is my favorite, I think, because of the memories, but also he's just a funny character.
What was like because when I was playing near the beginning of chapter 3, you get your first excuse me. You get your first outpost all built up, and then there's the big attack on the HQ. There's vertibirds, there's stingray jets. The jets came out of nowhere. That really took me aback. But like in Sim Settlements 2, like in general, like every chapter, it's just like it just gets better and better and better. There's something new, there's something cool, and it's like, whoa, you guys really did that. But out of like everything, what's like the big thing that like the most surprising thing that you guys were able to like pull off in engine?
Oh, that crash, for sure. Mm-hmm. That crash is so much smoke and mirrors, but at the end of the day, it actually happens. So like, at a point in development where like, maybe we have to do this as a BINC file. Maybe it's got to be a video cutscene. Glad we didn't go that route, because it turns out BINC files, when you try and play them on Xbox, it just goes to black screen and it won't go forward. That was a day one bug we had. It was like some people were getting to that moment and their screen would just go black and would never load again.
Whoops.
Yeah, a bug I reported to Bethesda, being like, hey, you can just lock somebody's game up permanently. Oops. Yikes. So, but yeah, getting that crash to work like that, we actually have that happening in game. There's a reason that we fade to white when the nuke hits, because we need there's like a lot of setup time to make that work. Like we have to pull that off, we have to dismount the player from the vertibird. Then we have to quickly load in the animated model of the vertibird with Lupe hanging, and then snap the player. When we can't snap the player. So there's a thing we can do in the engine called snapping, and it basically like forces an NPC into in the middle of an animation, instead of you having to watch them do the like climb up the ladder or whatever. Mm-hmm. So we can't actually do that with this particular thing, because if you snap, you bypass your opportunity to control the camera. It's like this is a weird technical limitation. So we have to like mount the player into this animation state, and then like cue up the music and like do all this stuff silently in the background. So that's why there's like this long white period. Fortunately, with a nuke, that's a reasonable cover up, right? And then we fade it back in, and then we play this animation sequence with all these queued up sound effects. And then right as the vertebrate's about to hit the ground, we cut to black. So yeah, that being able to work in engine was pretty wild.
That was a very wild scene.
I'm glad we got it mostly where. So for some people, there's a bug that can occasionally happen where the game just refuses to put the actor into that furniture, and then for some people, they just find themselves falling to the earth and then cuts to black, which still kind of works, but it's not as satisfying as watching that animation play out.
Right. Um, this is a bit more of a heady question. But like, because you talked about one of the things that your big like contribution to the writing and stuff. Because like writing isn't your wheelhouse, but you're the boss, so your thumbprint's going to be on there no matter what. But you said one of the philosophies that you were trying to keep everybody on the rails with is that nothing can be replaced. We only include. That's why a lot of the main story feels like it, as I said before, walks along with the main story. Nothing is tremendously intrusive. The mod itself recognizes a lot of the decision that you make in game, and does a little bit of smoke and mirrors to make it seem like the game is also recognizing what you do in the mod. Hence the attack on GNN, being able to recruit additional factions to help you in the war against the Gunners. In that sense, though, if, say, for example, there's a secret chapter 4, or you put out more chapters after that, or Sim Settlements 3 takes basically like Sim Settlements 3 like takes that everything that you did with Sim Settlements 2 and then adds on to it again with like more stuff. At what point does this whole modern Fallout Ship of Theseus go from being a mod for Fallout 4 to literally just like Fallout 4? Like where do you think is that big delineation that separates a mod being respectful and intricative of the main game, and where does it turn into basically the new Fallout 4? Because I myself and a lot of people have started to sort of recognize Sim Settlements 2 as like this is basically canon at this point.
Well, I guess it's until Fallout 5 comes out and ruins the fact that and reminds you all that we're not canon, right?
Right.
Like, wait, they don't mention Jake anywhere.
What the hell?
Yeah, a lot of people have said that, and it was. I wouldn't say that was our goal up front, but it kind of became the, like we acknowledged that as the reality of like, okay, well, as we set up this this conflict that's kind of bigger than what's happening in the Commonwealth, and we start talking about things that are like, like, hey, the world goes beyond the edges of the map that you see, right? And that there's people outside of that care. Once you start bringing in those higher stakes, like it naturally is going to usurp the other stuff. But I think as long as we continue to respect the canon, respect what happens in the base game, and we earned our way there, like I don't think anyone would say, maybe they would, that we cheated in the sense of like that we gave you unbelievable story. I feel like the writers did a very good job of making you feel like you naturally got to where you are. Like there's no point in the story where you're well, maybe there's a few. Again, I'm talking on a turn here.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's from one of the things I have to do when I'm involved in writing, and as the boss, as you'd say, is sometimes I've got to say like that doesn't feel believable. We need more to explain that, or this is too fast. I know we had some moments like that. I can't remember them offhand, like specific examples, but there are definitely some moments during our development where I'm like, this is happening too quickly. We're not earning this moment. That is definitely something that would be a little minor thing I've contributed with, which any editor would have. Like it was not. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I'm just trying to point out that we tried to make sure that we earned our place. So when we take you through the story, it doesn't feel like a reach that any of the particular things are happening. That all of them are because the moment before it deserved this move. You know what I mean? Like we're trying not to be or we're trying to find that balance of character driven and plot driven, right? Like the you want to have your characters going in a direction that makes sense for them. You want your player character going in a direction that makes sense to them. And then when plot moments happen, you want to react to them in a way that feels natural for what's come before it character wise. And I feel like we've earned all that. And so then the fact that our story ends up incorporating the base game, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. But I think that it really makes it important that our characters suck you in, like that so that way like that you can feel like that, like, oh, I feel like this is canon and this is now the way it goes every time. I hope that we've earned that, because I think one of the driving things when developing all mods that I ever do is I don't want to I try to be humble about it, and like I don't want to say that the original writers did a bad job, because obviously I love this story and that's why I want to be a part of it. So trying to do it respectfully and only enhance, as opposed to replacing and thinking that I can do a better job.
What would your reaction be if there was some kind of reference to Sim Settlements 2 story in Fallout 5 or some spin-off Fallout project?
Oh man, if they like drop an ASAM sensor reference in, I'm gonna you guys are gonna get I'm gonna record myself freaking out.
Right.
That would be crazy. Yeah, I don't anticipate it. Like one of the things, like there are a few moments in chapter 3 where we take a risk with canon, because like there's enough information out there in like for the people who deep dive into the lore of Fallout, and like auxiliary products like the pen and paper game and stuff, where we kind of know what's going on outside of Boston, but we had to take, eventually you have to take some liberties, and you introduce characters that clearly were made up. So like there's some potential to like it to ruin our story in a sense,
right?
But yeah, that would be mind blowing if they did any, even just like a minor nod would be really awesome. But the chances of like anybody in the story department being familiar enough with our story to care about it enough to do so, pretty slim. So I'm not putting any eggs in the basket.
Right. It would be pretty wild. But in that, maybe not in that same mindset, because obviously, being referenced in Fallout or in an official capacity, just like that's like next level. But as far as like the completion of the story, because as we talked about before, it works because it treads a very fine line of being respectful of not only the canon lore and the history, but also to the base game itself. So obviously there's limitations to some things that you are able to actually get away with in the game. In that sense, what is like the biggest thing that you or like the writing team wanted to implement, but because of these sort of restrictions that you guys placed upon yourself, you weren't able to actually do or actually able to implement as far as you would have liked it?
I feel like we didn't run into much. There were definitely like, because we stopped ourselves before we got to that point where we got excited enough about something. So generally, like, we knew from the get-go we're doing full player voice. We're doing the 4 choices because we want this mod to work on Xbox. We don't want to have to require some alternate mod, because Xbox is a significant portion of the audience. So we want to be able to support them. And again, making it feel like part of the natural game. Like one of my beefs with something like XDI, where you can have more options, is now all of a sudden every quest that does that, now you stand out as an anomaly against the vanilla quests. And that's something I don't like to do. I want all of our stuff to feel natural, so that the end goal is so that if somebody were to set up a blind play with our stuff, or somebody who hadn't played Fallout 4 in years and they put it on, they would have trouble dissecting whose was what.
Right.
If we can get to that point, I'm feeling pretty satisfied there. But I know I just totally flubbed on your question, and I answered something different because I was trying to get to a point and I forgot the point. So if you have the question, if you could remind me.
No, yeah, it was mostly just like what
couldn't we do? What couldn't we do? That's what it was.
You pretty much answered it right out the gate, because it sounds as if like you guys had your own restraints. Obviously you had things that you maybe not wanted to do, but like ideas that came up, and it's like, okay, how can we implement that? And if it's something that you could implement, you implemented it. And if it's something you couldn't implement with the restrictions in place, it just kind of got left on the cutting room floor.
There were a couple of like things that maybe we wanted to do and we chose a different direction instead. So One we might still do. So here's one that we might do one day. So we're parented to Automatron.
Mhm.
That's the only DLC we're parented to, and that's for technical reasons. We actually would have loved to parent to everything, but it creates a bunch of like intense restrictions on how things work in the creation kit if you parent to all of the DLC. So like the big projects like Cascadia and Miami and stuff who are using all the DLC, like they have to jump through a bunch of hoops when they're working on the mod. They have to, and we didn't want to have to deal with that. So so we opted not to, but we always thought that the Mechanist would have been a cool tie-in for all of our story stuff. And the only way we can figure out how to do that realistically, because she has very few dialogue lines, would be to revoice the character. So it would be find somebody who does at least as good a job as that VA and then do it ourselves. Maybe we leave in the robotic voices and we just recast the Isabella side, and basically whenever we have her show up, she's always without the mask, so that way we don't have to try and emulate the mask effect perfectly. We just have that character show up. So like that's something we could still do that we opted not to because of like one of the concerns was like if you're going to revoice a vanilla character, you have to have a better voice actor than the original. Like I think no one will complain about our voice actor for Wes. Like he is phenomenal, and the original Captain Wes is just a generic gunner voice. He doesn't even have any unique lines, so no one cared that we replaced him. But so Isabella was one that we opted not to do. All of the main factions we didn't touch for that reason of like we don't want to replace Elder Maxon, right? That's too much it's too important a character. Too people will remember that voice. It's going to be too hard to get away with that.
Right.
So like those types of things we never got to do because we would have loved to have been able to, have them speak more specifically. So instead, like our trick, and this is the same thing we did with the player. We couldn't revoice the player, obviously. Like it would have been impossible.
Right.
We stand against the AI generating lines of real people. Like that's like there's too many. That's too creepy.
Yeah.
I'll just say that. It's like it's really, it feels very, very invasion of somebody else's life to steal their voice and clone their lines. I don't like it.
It really does. Like I think the technology is really fascinating and really interesting, but like when it's used in like an artistic way like that, I don't know. It just feels like it's like an invasion of like, the connection that you're trying to establish, and it just doesn't feel right.
Well, and not only that, but the technology is also not quite there, and you can tell like once you get an ear for it, like it's pretty obvious which ones are voiced even with the good tech.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just feels awkward to clone their voices without their permission. I don't like that. So we opted not to do that, and so that made writing for the player very hard. But what we ended up doing for both the player and for vanilla NPCs is we would bring in our exposition character. So some character, that's why you always, a lot of times when you have to go somewhere to talk to somebody, you have an escort. You're bringing Lupe, or you're bringing Jake, or you're bringing Teresa, because we need somebody to espouse your exposition for you, because there's just not enough lines for the player to make it a believable conversation. And then we started doing that with the faction leaders. So you'll often find when the factions show up with an envoy at HQ, they will have an ambassador with them because that's our exposition character. So that was like the workaround we had. I would say the one like technical thing we probably could have done, but we opted not to because we just were worried about the conflicts it would cause. There was originally in the story, there was a moment where the Pridwin rolls into another location temporarily, and like we could probably figure it out, but the amount of potential breakage in the Brotherhood questline, I was like, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it.
Yeah, I could definitely see that being one of those situations where like it would be awesome, but the workload, just like the ROI on that isn't worth it. There's too much stuff that needs to happen to make that happen.
Well, and that's why, like, even from back in the SS1 days, like I've had a firm rule that we are not allowed to edit vanilla records. There's no deletion of anything. There's no moving anything. If it's vanilla, the only way we can impact it is if we can do it at runtime with a script. Then we can like hide things or whatever. But we don't. And like we figured out the hijack system where like, okay, we will cover up a door, but there has to be a mechanism for people to get back to the original door, because the amount of the ROI, as you said, on like the requirement for patching so that we're compatible with everybody else's stuff is just too much.
Yeah.
You look at some of these big quest mods that are willing to edit everything, and then you'll go search for it on Nexus, and you'll find that there's like 40 other patch mods for it, or like their optional files are full of 40 other micro files, is like, I don't want to deal with that, because that would be as if I'm the player and I come across this mod, and in order to play it I have to download all these micro patches. Like, I'm out. Like, it's just too it becomes too intimidating. Like, this is one of the reasons that I think a lot of framework mods fail, is because it's somebody, like a lot of new mod authors are like, if they have 6 frameworks to be dependent on, a lot of people are just going to just be like, nope, I'm out. I'm not doing that.
Now that you've completed Sim Settlements 2, like all the chapters in its entirety, aside from I believe what I've been hearing is like 2 years worth of support and like content update and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's about right. Like, I figure, like, just looking at how long it's taken me to fix most of the bugs in the previous chapters, like that's easily, like, I would say after about a year, we've got almost every bug that's not like little, like one of the, like, there's a certain type of bug we just don't bother with because there's other more pressing things. Like, for example, duplicate items in our city plan. Sometimes you'll scrap something and there's another copy of it underneath, and it's like that's probably going to stay there forever because the juice ain't worth the squeeze. It would take us several hours to fix that one item, and so it's like, wouldn't you rather me use my, I only have a couple hours each night to work on this, like, you'd rather me use that time for something else.
There's priorities.
Right. So beyond those kind of bugs, or like the super corner case things that we have trouble replicating, in a year we'll get pretty much everything worked out, and we'll have a lot of quality of life stuff. And then because we have a bunch of story content that's like partially finished, or some stuff that it's like this, like once we have this, we'll feel like that aspect of the character or mod is wrapped up. I added another year on there. So it's like, I would say, if you combine all of the stuff, so we have 2 lists. We have one which is like our, this is happening, and for sure, and then we have another list of like, well, if like, say we don't get Starfield modding tools, or we just like love these characters too much to let them go, here's another like list of stuff. I would say we have the equivalent of another chapter worth of content like on our internal roadmap, but how much of it actually makes it to production is uncertain right now. So so like over the next, so we're not going to do any more like monster releases like the chapters for it. We're basically just going to be doing like little content patches of like, oh, here's a new quest for so and so, or here's like this patch has some new people you can ally with for leading up to the battles, like stuff like that. Like, it'll just be little stuff to flesh out the experience. I could see at some point us partnering up with some of the other mod authors who have the equivalent of factions. Like, the one that a lot of people request is the Fence Sheriff Department would be an awesome one to be able to bring along on some of these, of like, partnering up with the author and being like, here's what you would need to do so that your stuff gets tied into ours, and making sure it's systemized. Stuff like that will be the kind of things we release in addition to bug fixes and quality of life. It's just little stuff to make the mod feel more whole, I guess, so that the stuff that is in it, we don't want it felt like there was stuff left on the table. When you go into the Bethesda game and you start playing around with the systems and you're like, this would be way better if it had XYZ, right? We don't want people going to the Sim Settlement systems and feeling that way, like, oh, I should mod this mod because it's missing XYZ. I would like to have those things covered, because when people start modding mods, you start running into conflicts.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
So instead, that's why I've always built the add-on system in, of like, it's going to be a nightmare if people start patching our code. So like, let's just find all the things they might want to patch in and give them the mechanisms to just do it out of the box.
So like as of right now, to get a little salacious, there's no plans for, the inevitable Sim Settlements 3. It's all focused on making Sim Settlements 2 as bug free and as expansive with quests and things to do as humanly possible. And
I think the frame, like SS2, I didn't even want to exist because it's confusing, right? It's like, oh, do I need, because like, especially now we got the chapters, like, oh, so do I go SS? So I go SS1 then SS2. Which one's SS3? Thinking, like that's the chapters. So it's already confusing. It was just kind of a necessary evil because I didn't know enough about Papyrus to do the core foundation of SS1 correctly, and now I'm confident in the framework we have. Like Workshop Framework, which is actually what powers most of SS2's systems, is pretty rock solid, because I didn't build it myself. I worked with some other people in the community who know a lot about this stuff. So it's a really, really solid framework to build on, and I don't see any reason to redo it. So that was the only reason SS3 or SS2 even existed. So otherwise, anything within the Fallout, the greater Boston area Fallout story will fit perfectly in SS2. There's no reason for us to make a 3.
Okay.
So like if a 3 ever existed, it would be like a Starfield or a Fallout 5 or some new system or new game where we're like, oh well, we want to bring the name recognition, and we'll have the same guiding philosophies behind it and like the same target. But like now, we started out with Sim Settlements 1, the goal was, all right, I don't want to have to manually build up all these settlements, but I would like to have them built up, right? So like, how can we make that faster? Or how can I make that faster? And then with Sim Settlements 2, it became, how do we make settlements meaningful? How do we make it so that they mattered to my gameplay, they matter to some characters in the game, and they have some payoff in story form? And I think we've achieved that. And then by the time we got to chapter 3, now we've expanded that to, okay, now how do I make the settlement gameplay meaningful, have a story impact, and then how do we role play being a leader of a country effectively, like that's why we call it the empire, is like, how do we simulate the idea that you are leading your own faction? Because throughout all Bethesda games, I didn't say all of them, but it's become more and more in their games, especially in Elder Scrolls, but now even in Fallout 4 it has it, where you're left at the end where you're in charge of some mega organizations, right? But that's where they end it, and it's like, okay, well, what does that actually mean? Usually it just means some Radiant quests, but it's like, no, how do we simulate that and make it feel like not only do you have the simulation of doing it, which is what HQ is, but also then what are some gameplay mechanics that can come out of it, and feeling like you earned your way there too. Like when I finish the storyline on the Institute side, I don't feel like I earned my way to be the head of the Institute. I feel like that was some serious nepotism there.
It was just given to you. Your son dad's all like, all right, you're in charge because I'm gonna die of cancer in a couple weeks or whatever. It's like, okay, cool. I guess I'm glad I showed up when I did.
Yeah. So that's it didn't really feel like it paid off. But even in like Elder Scrolls games, you go do like these random little quest lines, and all of a sudden you're in charge, and it's like, what? Like I did 5 quests. Then I should not be running your organization. You had perfectly good, capable leaders here that should have replaced the head leader that is dead now because of the quest line.
Yeah.
And it's like that in all of them. Like I'm pretty sure all 4 quest lines in faction quest lines end that way in Skyrim, if I'm recalling correctly, of like the leader ends up dead or disposed in some way, and then you're in charge now. It's like, what?
Which makes it really weird by the end, because you're like in charge of the Thieves Guild, and then like the Stormcloaks or the Empire or something, and you're like, what? Like, I was just about to be beheaded like 3 weeks ago. How did I get here?
Right.
And now I'm a god, and like I'm fighting dragons. Like, it's what?
Well, and I like that. Like I like the fact that it's kind of it's a long form. What is it they call the games like Doom? Power fantasy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Bethesda games are long form RPG power fantasies. Like at the end, you're untouchable, you're awesome, everybody loves you, the world revolves around you.
Yeah.
And I like that. That's a fun thing. But I would like to, it would be nice if the stories felt like they belonged getting to those points.
Yeah.
And
like
that's kind of what like you earned it. And that's what we tried to do with Sim Settlements or with Sim Settlements 2. By the time you get to chapter 3, of being like, you went on a pretty epic journey and you earned your place where you're at the end. So I think that kind of that goal of feeling that way in a game, I think like that will probably be one of the core things I focus on in anything else I create, whether it be a Sim Starfield or a Sim Settlements 3 or KingGath's Battlegrounds, whatever I make is going to be is going to have that kind of goal, because they don't see anybody doing that in the AAA space. There's no game is being made like that, of like this first person civilization, for lack of a better comparison.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm a little upset right now because you mentioned it, and now I'm sad there's not a Sim Settlements Battle Royale. Like,
Oh, I meant
come
that more
on.
as like the somebody going from modder to making their own games, because
Oh,
Player Unknown was an Arma modder, and then all of a sudden he released his own game.
I mean,
Um,
like we've had several Bethesda modders several Fallout modders go on to work for Bethesda, and it's like, who's to say that like they don't continue on with what they're doing now, and then later either become a part of a separate individual team or a like their own studio,
yeah,
start their own thing up.
yeah. There's like there's some people who have done it, and that's inspiring. Like Nick Pearson, who did I think his company's called Modern Storyteller. And they took their Skyrim mod and turned it into a fantastic Steam game. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's inspiring for sure.
Oh
But
yeah, the Forgotten City.
Forgotten City,
Very,
fantastic game.
very well done game.
But the amount of effort to get to your own game is way higher than it is with something like building mods. So it's a serious commitment, and not something that I would take on lightly. So it's right now it's I'm a modder. I'll stick that way for the time being. But
Right.
there are certain glitches in the game engine, or things that we lack the power to change, that those are what make me hungry to be like, I kind of want my own thing that I could fix this problem. But that's also why I'm kind of hopeful that we see Bethesda fix a lot of the big bugs in the remaster, the next gen version, or whatever they end up calling the release of the Fallout 4 thing.
The atomic
seeing
version.
some of these, right, as long as we see some of these engine issues that are blocking us fixed, would be great. But then there's certain other elements where even if they fix the bugs, there's never gonna change. Like the fact that the HUD and the user interface, like our ability to let the player interact, is so locked down.
Mhm.
There's no mechanisms for like, all right, I want to temporarily change, this hotkey to do this, or this button to do that. That's not a thing that Bethesda offers us. And so we have to rely on F4SE for that, or like really wonky workarounds. Like throughout some settlements, you see that we make heavy use of the barter container, because that's one of the few interfaces that we can kind of hijack to do things, but it feels jank. So like it would be nice to get out to not have a janky game. Like we have all this like really high quality writing, professional level voice acting, and then you've got this janky user interface. Like it's kind of a bummer, right? So
Do you guys got any big plans for Starfield modding? I mean, obviously we don't have a kit out yet or anything, but is there anything like within the world space, as far as we have been shown and been aware of, that you're, like a story you want to tell on some abandoned moon somewhere, as it relates to, Constellation or the Freestar Collective or anybody like that? Is there any sort of
nothing like that yet? But I will say two things that I've already seen that I like have got me hyped about it. One is I saw, you can kind of get a glimpse of how their workshop system works, and it looks like you place pods but have to decorate them on your own. So automatically to me that's like, well, that's a plot. Those pods are a plot. Now we can have them decorate. Let's have the script decorate them. So don't be surprised if I don't do it, somebody else will.
Yeah.
They'll ask me for code for SS2 code, and eventually I am going to open it up too. I'm going to open up the SS code so people can learn from it.
Yeah.
And so that'll be a mod. But my thing, with 1,000 planets, I kind of want to build my own city. I kind of want to see what happens if we just build our own, especially the scope of some of those cities, and then fill it out with all of our own characters and stuff on some remote planet. Like that's kind of enticing. But also a metric ton of work. So and it would also go against the whole, it would make it challenging to make it feel like it belongs in the universe. You could technically say like, well, in a star system that vast, anything can exist, but it will feel disconnected from your adventures if nobody in your story mentions your stuff and nobody in those stories mentions what you did either.
Right.
That's actually one of the challenges I'm curious to see how Bethesda dealt with, of like, are they going to have the people at the Constellation City, I don't know the names of the cities, but like the Constellation City, like, are they going to acknowledge things you did on the drug planet? What's it, Neon?
Yes, Neon.
You know what I mean? Like, is there going to be acknowledgement between those, or is each planet kind of going to be its own little ecosystem where like everybody knows what you did there but nobody knows outside? Because that would be a little bit disappointing from a Bethesda game, right? You want to feel like everybody cares, but that's a lot of work.
It really is, especially when it's like all the stuff that's going on this planet. It's like, well, why don't you know what's going on in the other planets? Like, because it's an entirely separate fucking planet, and I kind of got my own shit going on here.
I barely know what's going on with my neighbors.
I don't got time for somebody else's neighbors on an entirely separate planet. But with all that we've talked about in mind, what is the biggest thing that you've taken away from your entire, almost a decade working on Sim Settlement and Sim Settlement lead up projects like the Salvage Beacon? What is the biggest thing that you've learned, and what is the most important thing that you would advise, implore, suggest other modders, other Fallout fans to keep in mind with like their own modding projects or their own writing projects or their own story projects, or just artistic endeavors like that?
I would say it's release things, so because you build up hype and you build up your own confidence. And then I would also say to anybody working on like a project, like a group project, this is a lesson I've learned really hard, is throwing out requests for volunteers is about 1/100th as effective of just asking an individual to help you. Like sometimes I'll throw out a request of like, I'm looking for somebody to do this, and I might get a dozen bites, but none of them will be a good fit. But if I find somebody I know is good at a thing and just ask them for help, and we're upfront with each other about how long it'll take, a lot of times they'll do it just because they want to see you succeed, especially if you've got a little bit of track record. So again, that goes back to the first thing: release stuff. Just make stuff, get it pretty good, and put it out there, and find your audience, because they will help you get more people to help you, and they will inspire you, and you'll work off each other, you'll learn. So yeah, I think it's release. And this is something I hear a lot in from, if you watch YouTube channels that talk about how to get into game dev, like a lot of indie devs will do this, and they'll parrot the same thing of like, just make stuff to take it to completion. And I 100% have learned that to be very, very true in the modding scene. Just get stuff out there.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with KingGath, lead developer for the Sim Settlements mod series for Fallout 4. As always, if you enjoyed this episode of the Atomcast, the best way you can show your support is by subscribing to our Patreon, as your monthly contribution will go towards improving the quality of transmission, as well as helping to decrease the time between uploads. Until next time, I thank you so much for listening, and I will see you all out there in the wasteland.